So one of the, let's say, therapeutically speaking, greatest benefits of samadhis, even if it doesn't lead to liberation, is that in samadhi, the seeds of future, in this way we can put it, outcomes are roasted. They become inert. Spiritual experiences, dreams, and self-liberation. It comes from, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name, but Winde or Winde. A short background and a couple of questions. My spiritual path began in my early childhood due to the sudden loss of my father. Many existential questions led me to experiment with techniques that I later recognized in Eastern texts as meditation techniques. Since the age of 20, I have actively followed the path of yoga and tantra with daily practice and proper guidance. I have been fortunate to experience many higher spiritual states of consciousness both during retreats and in my daily practice, states such as nirvikalpa samadhi and others, which have also been confirmed by my teachers. I feel deeply honored to have relatively easy access to such experiences. However, I'm also very aware that they simply happen to me. In brackets, for example, in the middle of the night, during meditation, or even sometimes during the day, and I have little control over them. Questions. How can I ensure that the channel fully opens so that I can ultimately remain in a constant connection with the highest and reach self-liberation? And another question, I discovered you in 2016 and have followed almost all your videos, online programs ever since. Also, your book is on my shelf. I also frequently dream of you. Just last night, I had a very special dream in which I received an extraordinary healing from you. The field was so powerful that I have no doubt about the authenticity of the experience. Yet I cannot help but wonder, do you sometimes offer initiations in dreams? All right. Okay, so when in the first part of your question, when you ask, how can I ensure that the channel fully opens so that I can ultimately remain in a constant connection with the highest and reach self-liberation? Well, it kind of belongs to this, let's say, means that are applied in spiritual discourses, applications, upayas. And if you watched videos and have taken some online courses, as you outline here, then you must have come across, because across us speaking about this, because we give quite a bit of attention to elaborate on this on many occasions, so that there's clarity, there is no such thing as one size fits all, and also to point out where the highest means applied, when it is possible, when and how the different means, the upayas, are connected between themselves, right? From the individually tailored means to the conscious, let's say, means, right? To the empowered means, right? And ultimately no means. So this, let's say, different ways, different applications here. So all this what you spoke in your background this easy access to experiences such as Samadhi, nirvikalpa Samadhi, you even specify here, all this, you also ought to realize and understand that this in itself doesn't lead to liberation. It is very helpful, very useful, and even, I would say, a prerequisite for being established in a state of, let's say, that what yoga speaks of here traditionally, to eradicate the influence of these mental tendencies, vikalpas, and so forth. All this is very, very, very good. But that in itself does not, I mean, nirvikalpa samadhi, samadhi as such, as experience which has duration, beginning and end, doesn't lead to liberation. So at some point, whoever was or there in your, let's say, acted as guides, would have to start applying the methods that are tailored to that what brings that self-liberation that you speak of. The connection to the highest is never lost. It's a limitation of the language. We are always in, as it were, invisible connection to the source of who we are. This is the talk of town. That's we cannot be closer to our essence that we are at all times. It's a fact. And in fact, that's the very, very healthy reflection, healthy inquiry, that our connection to the divine, to the source, is not even measured to anything that here may be spoken of or considered as obstacles or limitations and so forth. That connection is granted, given. That's the magnanimity of creation. That's the beauty of how things are. So in a way, it's a very, very subtle, paradoxical nature of the way consciousness interacts within itself, where it gives this visceral sense of an apparent individual and this experience, undeniable experience, that is checked by subject-object dynamics. And of course, within that seemingly straightforward, simple subject-object dynamics, there's an infinitude of ways of how that tension is experienced. We could even speak about it maybe in musical terms, that it can be tuned to the degree of hitting the highest note and frequency, out of which melody is extracted, the resonance of the highest order, or it can be as flabby as producing the nerve-wracking dribbling sound. I don't know. You can interpret it further, but I just don't want you to even think for a moment that it's anything to do with how to remain in that constant connection. That has to be established in your understanding, and that is applying already one of the higher form of means, this upayas. See, even if it's at the mental level of self-reminder, which belongs to the higher means than the individually tailored means as meditation. I don't want to go now there in talking to the upayas because it's a topic in its own right, but just to give you this suggestion that the mode of teaching needs to go on to another level, that's all. For someone like yourself, as clearly expounded here. Now, with regard to what you cannot help but wonder, if I sometimes offer initiations in the dreams, let's bring clarity to that. Jokingly, of course, I say, no, don't worry, darling. I sleep tight. I'm a household. I've got enough of my plate. So when I hit the pillow, right, I like to have a sound sleep, and I'm lucky if I get one undisturbed. With 5-year-old and this and that, and what have you, teenage, being sandwiched by teenage kids like 17 and 14, you know. But if you want a bit more nuanced answer, if you prefer to understand, because you also said the field was so powerful, let's maybe give some, bring some clarity there, and for others maybe also, because at some point there were a lot more of these reflections back in the years where people like, I'm seeing you in dreams, like as guidance offered, and like, it's quite a bit more often. What is that? Why we see certain people in dreams, let's say, why certain people come into our dreams. When it comes to this, let's say, line of enterprise, when it comes to this work, someone like, let's say, myself, who spent fair amount of time in, frankly saying, in meditations, in sittings, when certain undeniable levels were accessed and where a certain imprints were left, it then belongs to the collective and not just to the individual experience. It's as simple as that. Because at the level that I'm speaking of here, it doesn't belong to me as a person. It is beyond the personhood. So accessing that level is accessing the level of the very aforementioned categories of creation, categories of manifestation, the tattvas. And the highest strata of the tattvas touched, then that leaves that resonance in the field, which cannot be maybe accessed in the waking state of consciousness, but it becomes more accessible in a state of dreams. And so some people report it being even initiated in a dream by so and so, in this case, like, asking me, do I consider this as a legitimate initiation because you initiated me in a dream? Others simply report dreaming and, whatever these experiences are. Sometimes people feel compelled to go in more detail. Sometimes they feel maybe restrained, what have you. This remains to be belonging to the intimate side of these experiences. But to understand this here simply, it's not that I do something and not that I don't do anything. It's what is left as that resonance. And that resonance, when one is simply being tuned, is available beyond the more gross experience that what is shared now by all of us in a waking state, which is the domain of the sensory experiences. Right? We know that very well, that it's the furthest shore of the manifested real, the furthest shore, right? The furthest shore is that where the ocean of being crashes in waves, and that furthest shore is that what these sensory experiences are. And what you experience in the dreams, what we experience in the dreams is more refined, much more refined. It belongs and it's an expression of subconscious, subtle realm, subtle. So access to that in meditation, of course, given is when we access the subtle body, because that's what that is. The domain where all our impressions in the form of mental tendencies and emotions reside. So, of course, that is the place of greatest healing at the very same time, because the healing takes place first and foremost and must take place at that level. The only other higher realm of healing is when it takes place in this, as it were, let's say, matter of things when we speak of healing as healing someone is when it takes place at the karmic level. And the karmic level corresponds to the deep sleep or expression of through the deep sleep. It is expressed where there is no access, there's no conscious access. So therefore, we don't know what happens at that level. But we do know that access to deep sleep is also similar to the access in nirvikalpa samadhi. They are cousins. They are very similar states, right? And the samadhi and sushupti are cousins, deep sleep, right? Jagrat, swapan, sushupti, waking, dreaming, deep sleep. So in deep sleep, even deeper healing takes place because what is being healed in a deep sleep belongs to the area beyond emotions and mental modifications. So in other words, it belongs to the very seeds that are carrying certain impressions that comprises that field where these impressions were sown in the first place. And when the right conditions are met, they sprout the seeds. So one of the, let's say, therapeutically speaking, greatest benefits of samadhis, even if it doesn't lead to liberation, is that in samadhi, the seeds of future, in this way we can put it, outcomes are roasted. They become inert, you see? So in other words, it's that level we speak of now, where the work is done. I don't even know if there is a conversation at that level in epigenetics, in genetics per se, in a modern day conversation among the neuroscientists of what's possible in terms of rewiring of our DNA. I would love to know if there is. Please feel free to share if there is some research in that, access or insights. I would be very, very curious. But in the science of yoga, it is very well known, always been known. In the deep sleep, we don't have access to that. But nevertheless, deep sleep is the most healing experience of all experiences. It literally awashes us and the whole organism from whatever experiences we had prior to that. It's a total reset. Like the primitive example is shutting down the computer completely. Computers built in such a way, when they're shut down, the program checks itself, right? The system checks itself. Because when the computer is put in the sleep mode, everything is active, but just in the sleep mode. I know it's a primitive example, and it is primitive, but it's an example for us modern beings who use computers and devices on every day. That's what deep sleep here represents. 20 minutes deep sleep equals 6 hours of sound sleep with dreams. Just 20 minutes of deep sleep. And going back to these experiences of you frequently dreaming of, and whether this, I did say yes and no. So yes and no belong to that. If these states were transcended by so and so, then that what is being pierced through, strung through, will then be accessible at that level. So, in other words, those whose sadhana was comprised of doing this work really, really at that level, all left that resonance, that hum that can be accessible. That's why it doesn't even matter if person is not in the body. One can dream of a being who lived some times ago and have healing experiences received there. because it's that resonance left at that level, you see, at that level of reality. And maybe just I throw it there for just purely from personal sharing as a conclusion here. So um, in my own sadhana, whatever was not done in meditation, completed in a sleep. And even in a sleep, whilst my body was supposed to be resting, laying down, I would often go through uh, spontaneous movements whilst in a sleep. Of course, it's in a state of lucid dreaming. In other words, it's not that I'm like body does something and I'm not aware. No, I'm fully aware of that. And body just does things. In other words, in my meditations, nothing was already happening. Sit as a sphinx, transcend and enjoy. No samavesha kriyas. But in a sleep, it would surprise me. I would even say, just to put the cards on the table, it happens to me still, even now, occasionally. Much more rare, but sometimes the body just does something. And in that body does something, of course, happens in that open field. You see? In that open field.